Tanni, tell us a little bit about yourself. And I know you got a big backstory, but just tell us a little bit about yourself.
So I was born with spina bifida and I could walk a little bit when I was young, but my legs never really developed properly because of the damage to my spine. And then as I grew, my spinal cord collapsed and my invertebra severed my spinal cord. So I ended up with scoliosis and having to have a couple of operations on my back. But I started using a wheelchair when I was very young, and I was really lucky. My parents were very positive about me having to use a chair. They didn't wrap me in cotton wool. It was all about what I could do, not what I couldn't do. And they pushed really hard for anyone who discriminated against me. And there's quite a lot of that around at the time. There is still some there now. So, I started off in mainstream primary school. And then my parents fought very hard to get me into mainstream secondary school, which was incredibly important for the rest of my life, actually, because at the time special schools didn't really educate disabled children. They just gave them something to do until they left school. So it was in high school that I started playing sports more seriously. I grew up in a very sporty family, and at the age of 12 I watched a guy called Chris Allen win the London Marathon. He grew up not too far from where I lived, and Chris was like this 6'4", dyed blonde hair, permanent tan, appalling tasting leopard print bodysuits. I could see my route through. So I started doing sport, and every decision I made from the age of 12 was around trying to be the best athlete I could be. So I went to Loughborough University, because that's where Seb Coe gone, and had 25 years as an athlete before then retiring and moving into politics.
No, I mean, a great backstory, and I think you competed in 5 Olympics, didn't you, which an achievement in itself. This probably sounds a silly question, but want to ask everyone. A lot of disabled people don't think of themselves as disabled. I mean, do you think of yourself as disabled, or how do you see yourself?
It's probably not the biggest part of my life for me, but it's what other people see, because my wheelchair is so obvious. I'm kind of disabled in different environments. So, in my house, I'm not, because I don't have a lot of adaptations, but, I fine. And so lots of parts of my life, my impairment doesn't hinder what I do. But it's more around attitude from other people, I'd say, who, say to me, oh, so what's wrong with you? Or, oh, it's a shame you like that. And my response to all those, it's been sort of developed over a period of years, is what Welsh. It's when people say, well, my daughter's 23 now, but when it was like, people like you shouldn't be allowed to have children, my response was, what Welsh people? So I don't think of myself every single day as being disabled. It just depends what's happening around me. If I can't get on and off a train, then yes, I am. I went to Liverpool the other week. They've got step-free boarding. It's amazing. I'm not disabled there. So it's very much around the attitude and society around me that makes me feel it. But it's not something I think about every day. It's just part of me.
No, absolutely, and I do follow a lot your tweets about your experiences of public transport, and I mean, you've got an extremely big following. I mean, I would suggest that you're not just a role model, you're a campaigner as well. There's lots of people who are one or the other, and I think you're both of those. I mean, how do you see yourself? Do you see yourself as a role model? Do you see yourself as a campaigner? And what motivates you to be a campaigner?
I think I'll probably call myself an activist, but that's just a technicality. I'm very privileged in the position I hold now, sitting in Parliament in the House of Lords. I've got the ability to feed into legislation and try and make it better for disabled people. And the reason I do that is that although I experienced discrimination as a child, I also had a lot of privilege in terms of my parents getting me into a mainstream school. Education kind of set me up, so I see it as to use the platform to try and change things for others and for me. I campaign for trains because I want to go on a train as well. So, my parents, when I was growing up, told me, that I had, a privilege, and because of my education, and then as an athlete, you have a platform. My parents were very keen that I used both of those to put something back. And that came through my first coach, a guy called Roy Anthony. He always used to say to us, if you get something out of sport, you give back. The fight is sometimes interesting. Although in the House of Lords, it's very dignified most of the time. But it's about just trying to get stuff better. Because actually, all I want is disabled people to be able to work, to go to school, to have decent housing. Same as I want for everybody. But there's lots of barriers for disabled people to do that. And, I do think disabled people should be contributing to society. But for a lot of them, it's just very difficult. Yeah, I just think, I was very lucky. I travelled the world, saw lots of different jurisdictions, how disabled people and women were treated in those. Then you come back to the UK and think, okay, there's more we need to do. So that's the thing that sort of gets me out of bed every day is, okay, what can we do to change things? How can we
Yeah,
make it better?
absolutely. And I mean, what do you think are the biggest barriers facing disabled people at the moment, which is, if you like, preventing them from participating in society? I mean, you hinted in it there, but probably other things. What do you see as those barriers?
It sort of still permeates through society. If you have a disabled child and the first thing you're told is, I'm sorry, but, it's, there's pressure on families to, not continue with a pregnancy if a child's disabled. Now, that's, a complete individual's choice. But from the beginning, it's very negative. A friend of ours had a traumatic injury a little while ago and broke his back. And pretty much the first thing he was told was, like, your life's over. And that negativity just permeates. So it's in education, it's in housing, it's in employment. We still don't have a mandatory pay gap reporting for disabled people. The numbers of disabled people, only about half of the disabled people who could work have a job. And so it all crosses over each other. And if you can't get to work because the public transport's not accessible, then every bit of it is hard. And unfortunately, what happens in Parliament, we discuss a lot of these things in isolation rather than being able to join them all up together. And, healthcare, there's challenges, with people getting health and social care. I mean, even getting to see a GP at the moment is, really, really difficult. So I think one of the biggest challenges that we conflate, or government conflates, disability and sick, and assume that if you're disabled, you're sick, or if you're sick, you're sick. Now, you can be both, but I think sometimes it's easier to keep tinkering around the edges of the welfare system and not actually provide meaningful jobs. Now, this is an issue for everybody. Proper job, just the high street's changed, and there's cafes and nail bars, and fast food, and they're jobs that don't pay particularly well. So we've got, I think, quite a big problem in this country anyway. And then you layer on disability, and it's even harder.
Absolutely. I mean, have you come across barriers? I mean, I know we talk about public transport, and you tweet a lot about your experiences of travelling on trains, and some of those come across as really horrendous. But I mean, have you personally come across barriers, and how you overcome them?
Yeah, lots of barriers. It's a lot of it's attitudinal, some of it's physical. Not being able to get on and off a train, or not being able to get into a building. To public transport, where I live, is sort of okay. London, there's only a third of the tube stations that are step free.
Yeah,
So, it's all these things that make it different. So I've experienced less than most, I'd say, because of the privilege I had of being an athlete and recognised. And now, in Parliament, that gives you a level of privilege. So, yeah, I'm probably a lot of it I had was when I was pregnant, people saying to me, people like you shouldn't be allowed to have children. That's where I developed the Welsh bit. So and there's a lot of low level sort of just daily, if you're trying to get on a bus, on New Year's Eve I got refused access to a bus, and I've been treated not brilliantly a couple of tube stations. It's the low level stuff that's hard, because the high level stuff it's easy to complain about, except disabled people don't, because it's exhausting. But it's the low level stuff that grinds you down. But I think from being an athlete, you get a lot of resilience to deal with it. And again, my family were like, okay, right, this happened to you, what are you going to do about it? So, how are you going to complain? How are you going to raise it? So for me, social media is one way. I don't think it's the way to start a formal complaint with an organisation. But one of the reasons I tweet about trains is because then non-disabled people realise the issues we have. So, I've been stuck on a couple of trains in the last year, and people now will say to me, are you all right? Can you get off? I'll go and find someone. So it's not just about like screaming into the ether. So a non-disabled person said to me last year, I didn't actually realise there were steps on trains, and because they just never thought about it, because a lot of non-disabled people don't really think about steps, they're just there, and because you can do them. And they said to me, I now realise actually it's quite hard. So it's some of my posting on social media is about getting non-disabled people to understand the reality of a bit of the lived experience. So Yeah, no, I've have lots, but I'm pretty thick-skinned about how I deal with it. I do get angry sometimes, but most of the time I'm like, okay, this hasn't worked. How are we gonna change the system to make it better? Because there's loads of disabled people who don't have the social media following I do, or the platform of being able to write to a minister, or being able to just sit in the chamber in Parliament and
Yeah,
say this. So we're actually working on bus legislation at the moment. That's my chance to sit and talk about why buses need to be better for disabled people.
absolutely. And I wish you best luck with that. I hope you bring back some big improvements. Tell me, do you think that the British media and the British public have an open and positive attitude towards disability and disabled people?
Quite mixed, I think. So Paralympians are generally quite well liked, same as Olympians, competing for your country. That's pretty good. But a lot of the media coverage around benefit scroungers, blue badge abuse, taking money out of the state. I don't think a lot of the coverage of disabled people, apart from sport, is very positive, or it's non-existent. So if you look at the last general election, there was very little on disabled people in any of the manifestos. It just gets ignored. And 20% of the population, that's kind of a bit of a group of people chucked together. But no, I think generally disabled people are ignored or treated not terribly well in the press. And then that feeds the public perception of disability, it being sad and tragic. And 2012 Olympics and Paralympics were amazing. Best 8 weeks of my life. I worked on the bid and delivery for 10 years. I worked on legacy for 10 years. It's still part of what I do. But they didn't change the world for disabled people. They, at the most harsh, we got step-free access at King's Cross and Green Park, and some cobbles got changed on the South Bank. Now, there is more than that. There's some quite subtle stuff. But, that doesn't help disabled people who are still experiencing discrimination. And after the Paris Games last year, Paralympics GB wrote to the education minister to say, look, why are disabled people still not accessing PE in schools? We're a lot of years on from 2012, and disabled children still, by and large, don't access PE. So, I get frustrated when people go, oh, 2012. Yeah, it was amazing, but I'm a bit now. So what? Because I don't think it's fair to expect 2 weeks of the games to change the world. You've got to do a lot of other stuff. So I think it's still pretty hard out there for a lot of disabled people.
Yeah, there's lots of negative attitudes. Have you heard of the social model of disability? And is it something you agree with?
Yes. So I first read about social model when I was quite young. Mike Oliver, Jane Campbell, who I now get to work with, Baroness Campbell in Parliament. So yeah, I do. I mean, I think it's evolved, and there's other versions, but it's still around, access and attitudes. The medical model, I think a lot of the media coverage is around medical model of disability. So I do think, if we make society more physically accessible, it actually doesn't just make it easier for me or disabled people, it makes it better for everybody. One of the things with, campaigning for step-free access is it makes it better for everyone to get on and off the train, older people, small people, buggy, you name it. So I do think the social model is important because it reframes. And for me, it really helped me because it's not my fault I'm a wheelchair user. The reason I can't do stuff is because there's steps and inaccessibility and attitudes. So I do think social model is kind of important. Now, there's some disability rights campaigners. There's an amazing woman called Ellen Clifford she's written loads of really good stuff, but she's evolving that model, and I think it's quite interesting that it does evolve and move forward.
Yeah, no, Ellen does some amazing work. You're quite right. At the moment, we've got I call it the assisted suicide bill, the assisted dying bill going through Parliament. I mean, it's receiving lots of coverage. There's stuff in the paper today about them wanting to water down some of the controls already. What's your opinion, Bill? And do you think that the use of a private member's bill is the right route through Parliament for that, or should it actually be in a government bill? Should there be a commission to think it through properly and make sure proper safeguards there? I don't know what your views on that are.
This is one of the biggest changes in our society that we're ever going to see. So I don't think a private member's bill is the right way to do it, because it doesn't get a lot of time. And, I do think there should be a commission that looks in detail. I think this bill is a dreadful bill, and we keep being told there's, it's the most safeguards, it's the strongest bill anywhere in the world. That's not right. I think there are a group of people who are just desperate to get it across the line. And what we've heard in recent days about changing. So one of the things that gave people some comfort was there would be involvement from the Family Division High Court. Now, we've known for a long time that the Family Division is under massive pressure anyway. What we've heard in the last few days is, and Kim Leadbeater had to say this at second reading, she hadn't consulted any current members of the Family Division, but actually there wasn't the capacity to do it. So what we're hearing now, it's going to be a panel, and then there might be an oversight panel above that, and that to me just weakens it even more. I could talk about this for a long time, but I'm really worried about the impact on disabled people. Now, we keep being told it's not for disabled people, but this is where conflating sick and disabled means that it very well could be. And, we know there's other jurisdictions where they allow it for anorexia, if you're tired of life, if you hit 70, and Canada, which a lot of people are rowing back from now, allows it if you're poor. So, a question, is this really what we want a society to be? This is not a way to fix the crisis in the NHS. So for me, I'm really worried about the impact on disabled people, because if doctors don't think a disabled person's life's worth living, or they haven't got any value, and we saw that in COVID, where they did have to make incredibly difficult choices about who got access to a ventilator. But do not attempt resuscitation orders were put on thousands of disabled people without their knowledge or permission, and it's still happening. So, and doctors in this bill are allowed to suggest it to the patient. So I'm really worried about it, because I think it'll be seen as a way to fix society. And this is not, a society I think is tolerable. And I don't come from any religious perspective on this. I've been told, it's like I'm an atheist. I just don't think it's a society I think protects the most vulnerable. We need to sort palliative care, we need to sort health and social care, we need to sort other things, and then maybe think about what we do to protect people at end of life. This is a really clumsy and quite scary way of doing it.
I mean, one of the photos I saw, one of the demos against the bill, the most telling placard I saw was, "The government will assist me to die, but it won't assist me to live."
Yeah.
I think that was word, or support me to live. And I think there's lots of issues in there.
Yeah, I agree. I just think it's just not, I find it quite scary that, it seems to be based on the back of, but there's been loads of attempts over the years, but it seems to have been, a promise from the Prime Minister to Esther Rantzen. And I'm really uncomfortable. Emotion, I don't want to hear some of the stories we've heard about awful deaths are tragic and horrible and should never happen, because there should be better palliative care. But emotion is not the way to make legislation, because when it's on the statute books, you're not dealing with emotion in the same way.
I absolutely, totally agree with you. Tanni, thank you for answering all those questions and giving you time this morning. Is there anything else you want to add? Just open invitation. If there's anything we haven't covered or you'd like to say more about, please do.
Just, disabled people have loads to offer society, and we're missing a trick by not making that happen. And there are loads of really good people out there who are trying to kind of change things, but we need to be better, and we need to just be better as a society about how we treat everybody. What gives me comfort is there's loads of people, I might be sitting in Parliament, but I've got loads of friends, supporters, people on the outside who help me do what I do, and without them it wouldn't be possible. Yeah, it's good to be doing stuff like this, and yeah, we need to get those stories out there.
Absolutely. And I mean, I know it's got through All for Inclusion is trying to do that, and I know there's lots of other organisations get out there, but thank you for the work you do. I mean, you do an amazing job both in Parliament, but I mean, you're being offered, taken on this role through the Prime Minister of looking at air travel, isn't it, and the accessibility of air travel. I just wish we'd given the wider remit of public transport as well.
Maybe next, if I do a good job on this, you never know. We might get the chance to work out some other things too.
I certainly hope so, and I look forward to seeing your findings and the report that comes from that work. Thank you very much for your time, Tanni. Really
Thank
appreciate
you.
it.
Thanks.